You're mid-corner, committed to the lean, when a car pulls out right in front of you. Your brain screams, "Brake!" But everything you've been taught says, "Do not touch that front lever in a turn." So what do? You try to straighten up first, and that sends you wide straight into the car's path. That split-second hesitation is the difference between riding home and becoming a statistic. Here's what nobody tells you. Japanese riders have a 40% lower fatality rate in urban intersections. Not because they have better bikes or better roads, because they are taught one specific technique that lets them brake hard while leaned over. It is a mechanical manipulation of the front fork that keeps the tire glued to the pavement when you need it most. And it completely contradicts everything the Motorcycle Safety Foundation teaches about emergency braking. The standard advice you got in your riding course was simple. Get all your braking done before the turn, release the lever, then lean. Brake in a straight line only. Never touch the front brake while leaned over. Sounds safe, right? That advice is a death trap. Here's the physics nightmare nobody explains. When you release the front brake to start your turn, the fork extends. The compressed spring you were loading suddenly unloads, and your front tire's contact patch shrinks. The geometry of the whole bike changes at the exact moment you ask the tire to do the hardest work of the corner. It's the pogo-stick effect. You compress the fork under braking, which steepens the rake angle and plants more weight on the front tire. Then you let go, the fork shoots back up, the rake angle slackens, and suddenly you are asking a smaller contact patch to handle all your cornering forces. That is not stability. That is a catapult waiting to throw you. The brutal truth is this. The geometry change during that release is what actually breaks traction. It is not the braking itself. You are being taught to remove your most powerful stability tool right when you need it most. Think about the financial reality here. How many low sides happen because someone did everything right according to their training? They braked hard in a straight line, released completely, started their lean, and the front tire just washed out. The insurance company calls it rider error. The rider says, "I do not know what happened." But what actually happened is the fork extended, the contact patch shrank, and physics did what physics does. You are being taught to be a passenger in an emergency. The bike is making all the decisions while you just hold on and hope. That is not riding. That is praying with handlebars. Here's where it gets interesting. Japanese police do not teach this at all. The Komei motor officers are taught the exact opposite. They use the front brake as a geometry adjustment tool throughout the entire corner. Keep the fork compressed, keep the contact patch large. Stay in control. The difference is not cultural, it is mechanical. They understand that your front brake does not just slow you down. It changes how your bike sits on the road, how it steers, and how much grip you have available. Throwing away that tool because you are afraid of it is like refusing to use your seatbelt because you are worried it might wrinkle your shirt. Let me explain rake and trail in plain English, because this is the secret that changes everything. Rake is the angle of your front fork relative to vertical. Trail is how far behind the contact patch your steering axis hits the ground. Together, they determine how stable your bike feels and how much effort it takes to turn. When you squeeze the front brake, you compress the fork. That compression steepens the rake angle. A steeper rake makes the bike want to turn more easily and loads more weight onto the front tire. That weight increases the size of your contact patch, the actual rubber touching the pavement. More contact patch means more available grip. Think of your fork as a loaded spring. When it is compressed, it is stable. All that energy is contained, controlled, working for you. The bike sits lower, the center of gravity drops, and the front tire is pressed firmly into the road surface. That is the geometry you want when you're asking the tire to grip through a corner. But when you release the brake and let that spring extend, you are throwing away every mechanical advantage you just created. The rake angle slackens, which makes the bike more stable in a straight line, but less responsive to steering input. The weight comes off the front tire, the contact patch shrinks, and suddenly you are asking less rubber to do more work. Japanese motor officers do not think of the brake as just a speed control device. They use it as a geometry adjustment tool. They actively manipulate the rake angle throughout the corner to keep the bike in its most stable configuration. That compressed fork position is not something you want to give up. It is your primary weapon against physics trying to throw you down. Here is the contact patch reality that nobody wants to explain. More weight equals more grip, up to the limit where the tire starts to slide. That limit is way higher than most riders think. Your front tire can handle enormous amounts of load if you apply it progressively, but it cannot handle sudden changes in load. That is what kills traction. When you keep the compressed fork through the corner, you are maintaining a consistent contact patch size. The tire knows what is being asked of it. The rubber is working evenly across the tread. You have steering authority because the bike is in its most responsive geometry. The mechanical advantage you are throwing away when you release early is massive. You lose the ability to adjust your line mid-corner. You lose the stability of that compressed fork position. You lose the larger contact patch. And worst of all, you lose the option to add more brake if something goes wrong, because you cannot add brake from zero. You can only add brake from some amount of existing pressure. So if the brake is actually stabilizing the bike through geometry control, why are we told never to use it in a turn? Because teaching progressive brake application is harder than teaching do not touch it. Because lawsuits are expensive and simple rules are legally defensible. Because the training industry would rather you be predictably cautious than actually skilled. Progressive loading is the opposite of panic stabbing. It is a deliberate, controlled application of brake pressure that keeps your tire in constant communication with the pavement. Most crashes do not happen because someone braked too hard. They happen because someone braked too suddenly. The technique has 3 stages: the take-up, the bite, and the trail. Each stage serves a specific mechanical purpose. Skip one, and you are asking the tire to do something it physically cannot handle. Stage 1 is the take-up. This is where you remove all the slack from the brake lever without actually generating any stopping power yet. Your hand closes around the lever, takes up the free play in the system, and brings the pads right up to the rotor. No pressure, no deceleration, just preparation. This stage happens in about half a second, and most riders skip it entirely because they don't even know it exists. Stage 2 is the bite point. This is where the pads make contact with the rotor and you start generating actual braking force. But you're not grabbing, you're squeezing. Imagine you're holding an orange and you want the juice, not the pulp. Steady, progressive pressure that loads the front tire gradually. The fork compresses smoothly, the contact patch grows, the bike's weight transfers forward in a controlled way that the tire can handle. This is where most people fail. They skip straight from zero pressure to maximum panic, and the tire has no chance to adapt. The contact patch goes from normal size to overloaded in a fraction of a second, and the rubber just gives up. That's not a braking failure, that's a technique failure. Here's what this technique actually gives you: the ability to adjust your line mid-corner. With traditional straight-line braking, your line is locked in the moment you release the lever. Whatever path you are on, that is the path you are stuck with. When you are trailing 10% brake pressure to the apex, you can add more brake if you need to tighten your line. You can release slightly if you need to run wider. You have options. This is not advanced technique. This is basic survival skill. The real kicker is that you probably already do a version of this when you are not panicking. Smooth parking lot maneuvers and easy turns on familiar roads show you are naturally progressive with the controls because you are not scared. The problem is, nobody taught you to keep that same smoothness when a car pulls out mid-corner. Now here's the part that changes everything, that last 10%. Keeping light pressure on the front brake all the way to the apex is not optional. It is non-negotiable. That 10% is what separates the riders who make it through the intersection from the ones who almost make it. The physics are simple. That 10% keeps the fork compressed and the geometry stable. Your rake angle stays steep. Your contact patch stays large. Your center of gravity stays low. Every mechanical advantage you built up during the initial braking phase stays active through the entire corner. You're not giving anything back to physics. But here is what really matters. It gives you steering authority when you need it most. With the fork compressed, the bike is in its most responsive geometry. Small inputs at the bars create predictable changes in your line. You can place the bike exactly where you want it, inch by inch, because you are working with the suspension instead of fighting against it. The emergency benefit is massive. You can add more brake if you need to. You cannot do that if you have already released to zero. If a car keeps pulling out, if gravel appears mid-corner, if you realize you're coming in too hot, you have options. You can squeeze harder from 10%. You cannot squeeze harder from nothing. The parking lot drill is dead simple. Set up a circle of cones about 20 feet across. It costs $20. Ride around the circle at 15 miles per hour and practice the squeeze. Take up, bite, trail. Feel the fork compress. Feel the bike settle. Feel how much more stable it gets when you maintain that light pressure through the turn. Do it 50 times. Do it until your hand understands the progression without your brain having to think about it. Do it until 10% pressure feels like your default setting, not some scary advanced technique. Because this is not advanced. This is fundamental. This is the difference between being a rider and being a passenger who sometimes gets lucky. The financial realist reminder: this drill costs nothing. A parking lot, some cones, your time, maybe an hour of practice. Compare that to what a crash costs. The insurance deductible, the bike repairs, the medical bills if you are not wearing proper gear, the time off work, the fear that creeps in every time you approach an intersection after that. That 10% is not just life insurance for your tire's grip. It is financial insurance for everything you have invested in riding: your bike, your gear, your body, your confidence. All of it protected by maintaining light brake pressure through the apex. If you are not practicing progressive loading, you are just hoping physics works in your favor. Hope is not a strategy. The Japanese method is not some secret technique that requires years of track experience. It is better engineering applied to rider training. Drop a comment and let me know. Were you taught to never touch the front brake in a turn? That advice has probably created more crashes than it has prevented. Hit subscribe if this changed how you think about emergency braking. We are building a community of riders who understand the actual mechanics instead of just repeating what we were told.